everybody, and welcome to the Paranormal Portal. I'm your host, Brent Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got an epic show ahead, but just remember, if any of you have experiences you'd like to share, I'd love to hear from you. You can either email me at paranormalportalradio@gmail.com or head over to paranormalportal.net and scroll down and find the button that says Interview Me, and that'll allow you to look at a calendar of possible times and dates and find a date that works for you. Love to hear your stories, so definitely get in touch with me. Hey everybody, welcome to the Paranormal Portal. I'm your host, Brent Thomas, and thank you all for joining me, and thank you all for your love and support as we continue to watch the show grow. And that's thanks to all of you recommending the show to people you know. So thank you all so much. It really is very appreciated. We've got a fantastic show lined up for you guys today. I am joined by author Robert Allred, who has written 2 books. His first book was called Mysteries of the Norman Conquest, and he's here to talk about his newest book, which is A History of Military Encounters with UFOs, and that's published by Pen and Sword Books out of the UK, and it's available everywhere, so I hope you guys will pick up a copy of that. But we're going to talk to Robert now, and he's going to take us on a journey. So without further delay, let's get to it. Hey, Robert, thank you for coming on the show.
And I thank you, Brent, for inviting me onto your program.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. You and I have been talking at length before, and I was like, man, I wish we were recording this. But I just am fascinated by what you've researched, what you've experienced, what your insights are. But I guess probably the best place to start is, how did this all begin for you? At what point did you go, you know what, I'm going to write a book about these military encounters with UFOs? How did that come to be?
Briefly as possible, after I got done with my working career, as it were, I went to the local community college. I had preference, so I transferred to UC Berkeley. While I was there, one of my majors, I took 2 majors because being an older guy, I thought I had less time. American Studies. I did a thesis on UFOs as a cultural function of American history, and in that one, I was pretty skeptical, and I took the attitude that a lot of it constituted showbiz, mythology, fables, and myths. And then, after I transferred to Berkeley and got out of there, I'm sorry, I'd already transferred to Berkeley. I didn't do it twice. I kept on writing. That's what I meant to say. My final semester, I was given the opportunity to study abroad, and I studied in southern England near the Hastings battlefield, and I visited that place 5 times and some other battlefields, and I came to the conclusion that the battle wasn't fought where they think it was fought. It was fought just to one side of the accepted location.
Oh.
And later on, when I was trying to interest publishers in it, a small publisher, Casemate Books in Pennsylvania, referred me to Pen and Sword. They printed that book. So I finally broke into writing at the young age of 74. So after I came out with that one, they were pleased with my research. I walked the battlefields, as I said. I referred to texts in Old English, Old Norse, Old French, Old Latin. So I did my homework. They said, what else you got? And I said, for some reason, they're a military publisher. So it struck me, how about military encounters with UFOs? They said, good, write it.
Oh, nice.
So I wrote the book. And, the rest is history, including that of military encounters with UFOs.
Well, it's fascinating because, it is a pretty amazing evolution of concepts and themes. But it's certainly something we've been hearing a lot of through the years. Of course, Rendlesham, of course, the Foo Fighters in World War II, and I gotta say that as far as witnesses go, and this isn't meant to be disparaging towards any witnesses, people that have seen something, but of course, these are in a lot of cases trained observers. These are pilots that know what should be up there, and they know when something doesn't fit the normal narrative of what should be up there. So I find any pilot's witnesses very compelling, but especially the military, because there does seem to be a correlation with military activity and the presence of these strange objects. What are your thoughts on that?
They do take an extreme interest in military bases and our industrial sites. In the book, I mentioned that they monitored the activities at a uranium mine in Africa, that they even were shadowing a naval base in Uruguay. So they're not just interested in nuclear weapons, because the last time I checked, Uruguay does not have nuclear weapons. So, yeah, this book covers events worldwide to a certain degree, but it focuses on incidents in the United States and the UK to a large degree, because we have reliable military people who retired or moved on and wrote about it, and I was able to mine their books, and I give them full credit. I have over 900 citations in the book. And many of these incidents, for example, a little known incident at Minot, North Dakota, out of our 450 strategic missiles we had at the time, 50 of them were shut down. And it was reported by Robert Hastings, who is a historian of military encounters with UFOs also. Said a UFO had been spotted by at least 3 Air Force men nearby at the time. Now, this was covered in the mainstream press, but it's still little known, because pretty much newspapers outside of the Dakotas and Minnesota didn't cover it.
Right. Wow. Now that case was extra intriguing to me because, of course, those were all standalone systems, right? I mean, it's not like they were hooked up to the internet and they just got a virus and got hacked kind of thing. These were hardwired independent systems with actual operators there. Isn't that correct?
Yes, and the Air Force gave conflicting excuses about what possibly happened. They said that the system could not be hacked, which may or may not be true. Then they decided it was a software issue. And then later they determined that it may have been a cable breach, which is not software, it's hardware. But the fact is, they came up really not knowing what was going on there.
And I might be confusing this incident, but weren't those missiles actually rendered inoperable, the ones that were there, and they had to be absolutely switched out or mechanically?
Yes, in that case and in others, at other strategic missile bases, technicians had to come out and reset things. Often they found no damage, just for some reason everything was scrambled.
Huh. And and this is asking you to really speculate, and I apologize for this, but do you think that their interest just lies in observation, or is it just monitoring our technological growth, or what do you think is motivating their interest? Because that is a theme that comes up all the time, of course, is the nuclear elements, whether it be power generation stations or armaments or any number of nuclear applications.
I think they're monitoring all aspects of our species and civilization. Luis Elizondo, whom I consider to be an impeccable source, since he had been former director of the program monitoring UFOs at the Pentagon, he has begun calling it an initial preparation of the battlefield. I agree that they're staging a preliminary reconnaissance should we ever decide to resist what they're up to. When I went into the book, I still had this naive notion that perhaps they were our space brothers, They were just curious. This was scientific investigations. As I went through the book and I saw their behaviors, their misbehaviors really, of how they mistreat their captives, mislead people, stage dominance displays to intimidate our political and military leaders, I concluded that these are not nice guys. One of my favorite sayings is, they're not the Salvation Army. They're not here to help us. They're here to help themselves.
Yeah, and as you and I were talking before we recorded, I did mention that I've talked to abductees as well, and one gentleman was a very professional person, had this incredible pedigree of accomplishment, but he had a lifelong issue with dealing with abduction situations, and to hear the emotional toll that man was paying for these events was just heartbreaking. It really was. And it's hard to find any kind of merit or acceptable narrative to make that okay. But I do often wonder, Robert, about things like the ancient alien idea that, these beings, these intelligences have been here and maybe guided us at some point very actively, but now almost seem adversarial. And again, I know there's no real answers to this, but do you think that it's one and the same, or do you think we might be dealing with something completely different?
Well, I think their original intent was some sort of a survey, and when they discovered there were some resources here they could exploit, they started doing that. I
Oh,
I think the ancient occurrences, I don't think they intervened on our behalf. I think they just were curious and keeping tabs on things. I think the real interest started around the time that we were looking into nuclear physics in the late 1880s, and it accelerated since then because uh, former abductee, retired Air Force Sergeant Charles Moody had said that they had told him telepathically that they were concerned with three things: projectile weapons, such as bullets, they couldn't interfere with their guidance systems; powerful radar beams that could disrupt their guidance and control; and nuclear weapons, which had the same effects. Since then, and since researching and writing this book, I concluded that they should also be, and probably are, concerned about our development of lasers, microwave lasers, particle beams, and recently X-ray lasers, which in all these cases, provided, I believe when they're in interstellar space, interplanetary space, they have shields like they had in Star Trek to protect them. I believe when they enter Earth's atmosphere, either they feel at ease or they need to shut them off to save power or to monitor our electromagnetic transmissions. Then they're vulnerable. That's when they might have been hit by bullets. The one at Roswell, I speculate, was brought down by powerful radar beams locking onto the craft in conjunction with the radio industry had just started. There were a lot of radio transmitters in the area, commercial. And also, I think, fortunately for us, but unfortunately for the crew of that craft, while this electromagnetic cascade was hitting their instrumentation, there was a lightning strike. And I think that was the last straw that caused them to stage a glancing blow at the Foster Ranch, do a bounce, and come down again closer to Roswell Airfield. And it's my speculation it was one craft with two crash sites. And according to two deputies who had gone looking for the site initially, they found a scorched area in a pasture, well, in the grassland, that looked as if something had touched down there with high heat and then left. And when I was investigating the green fireballs phenomenon, which occurred in 1949, as I recall, Dr. Lincoln LaPaz had been tasked with trying to find out what the green fireballs were. He was given a driver from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, who later reported that he and the professor found that scorched area in the grassland, which to me does corroborate the story of the two deputies. I found that at a little known website. And I can't remember who was the curator, but he was a well-known UFO researcher at the time.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think their interest has increased since we developed nuclear weapons. I don't think that they want us to avoid nuclear war for altruistic reasons, but rather they don't want us to interfere with their gathering of resources they're exploiting on our planet. So they engage in these dominance displays like hovering over missile fields and shutting down the missiles. And it's an intimidation technique. They're saying, see what we can do? The resistance is futile.
Yeah, so powerful and frightening. The thing that I ponder about that, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but of course, I try to think of all angles on these things, as much as I'm capable of it, which sometimes is not too many angles. But it occurs to me that if they've been here, why and they wanted just to take over things, why would they wait until we have a bigger stick? Like, oh, now we can, detonate nuclear materials. But they could have done that when we were still, dragging swords around and stuff.
Well, I don't think they saw the need, and I don't think they see the need now because they're getting candy from free. Why fight? They want to avoid combat. Now, there's the possibility that there's some sort of prime directive from the Galactic Federation saying don't wipe out primitive races or commit serious crimes against them. But there might not be. Some abductees, one lady reported, and I forget the source right now, but she reported that when one alien questioned another telepathically if a certain procedure had been performed, he had replied, that would be a treaty violation. So I'm wondering, a treaty with whom? I speculate a lot in the book. Some of my speculation is, given that descriptions of ETs on different continents vary, perhaps there are several species, and each of these has its own territory to exploit, like the Europeans did to Africa in the 1800s. Another possibility is that the story about President Eisenhower meeting with aliens and cutting a deal is true. He
Yeah.
would have had to have done so from a position of weakness, allowing them to abduct people, perform certain procedures, and return them relatively unharmed. I say relatively because they don't seem to have severe physical injuries, but as you mentioned, it's very traumatizing. I neglected to go where I'm going to go initially because I thought it would cost me credibility. But when I was asked on another show if I'd had any kind of an encounter, I described how my sons and I had been outside at our rural place, and I had decided to show them the North Star. And when I flashed a 2 million candle power light at the star, 3 lights flashed back. So I had 2 witnesses in that incident. And then many years later, in 2023, on August 29th, the lights at our ranch began doing all kinds of crazy things. All the lights flickering, going on, going off, becoming brighter. So I was so tired I had gone to sleep, kept my wife up all night. We went back to town the next day, and people went on next door and complained the same things had been happening in this neighborhood.
Wow.
So this had been after I had written this book, and I was beginning to think about the hitchhiker effect, where when you look at this phenomenon, it looks back.
Yeah.
So 3 months later, October 29, 2023, I'll never forget, I was out looking for some firewood when I heard this low throbbing sound, and I had decided that it was probably from being on the tractor. I shut it off, got off it. I still heard it and felt it coming up from the ground. It was in the air all around. I scanned the horizon, forgetting I had a visor on. I didn't look up overhead. And knowing what I've learned since, prior to that, I grabbed my pistol and projected the thought, whether you're from here or somewhere else, I'm shooting. And the throbbing instantly stopped. So this was just after 4 p.m. I didn't have any missing time. I took care of my chores, locked up everything, went inside. At 8:03 that night, I was lying in bed. My wife was reading. We both heard the sound at the same time. She poked me. I said, I hear it. There was this roaring, whooshing sound like a railroad car cutting through the air at high speed. No engine noise. Our place is in rugged, remote, very uneven ground, high ridges on all sides, well, 3 sides. This thing swooped over one ridge top, went over another one in 4.5 seconds, about a half mile away. So I figured it was going 450 miles an hour. She had been an extreme skeptic. She was a former non-com in a foreign elite military force. There's no one more down to earth. She looked at me and said, "This is real." Now, it was her remark coming from her that made me go into a state of shock. I was thinking, and Luis Elizondo said the same thing, taking the expletive deleted aside. This is real.
Yeah.
I was in a state of shock for 6 weeks, going, oh my God, this is real. And they came to my residence once for sure, twice maybe if you count the flickering lights. So then on December 11th, Saturday, I said to myself, I've got to snap out of this. I just got to get on and move forward. And the reason I mentioned this aspect is I believe we're now in the process of gradual disclosure, led by people such as Luis Elizondo and Christopher Mellon, who was the former Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. They're slowly letting all the information out, including the Navy videos, which the Navy acknowledged are real. Because to do it all at once, to dump it all on everyone all at once, it would have the same effect it had on me. I was able to function, but I was very uneasy all the time, especially when we went back to the ranch.
Yeah.
Since dissipated because I decided, based on what I learned in my research, that they can find you anytime, anywhere they want, even in town. So, coincidentally, yesterday morning, 5 a.m., I woke up. My wife was, being a former military woman, she was already awake. She said, it's windy. There was a big gust of wind just now. I said, okay. Went in the bathroom, took care of business, opened the window, looked out. There wasn't a breath of air. No leaves were rustling, nothing. Just before I opened the window, I heard it myself. It sounded like it was not as loud as at the ranch, but it sounded like something big, maybe the size of a big rig, whooshing through the air with no engine sounds down the street. So I came out, I mentioned it to her, and she said, do you think maybe they know you're going to be on the radio, on your show now today?
Yeah.
Prior to that, after the ranch incident, I had told her, if they want to send me a message, they should use email because I'm not going for this. So, yeah, I can understand the traumatic effect it'll have on people. It's happened to me personally in an indirect way. I really didn't see anything. I certainly didn't run into any aliens, but I think that would be absolutely terrifying.
Sure. Yeah. And that's a great point. That, the hitchhiker effect, I'm firmly convinced is a very real phenomena. And it's also, it's not only the fact that it can carry on for you, but it can carry on to people you're in contact with. It spreads almost like a pathogen. It's such a crazy phenomena,
Well, as a matter of fact, his book just arrived here 2 days ago, Imminent. I haven't read it yet, but I had heard that in the book, he says green fireballs appeared in his house, and his family and friends and neighbors all saw them as well. So, yeah, the hitchhiker effect worked for Leo Elizondo as well. And as far as I know, he's come into no close direct contact, so he must have picked up the contamination, as it were, from someone else.
Yeah, it might be something more akin to a quantum entanglement or just by virtue of having a knowledge of something, you're sending out a beacon of sorts, in your thoughts. Yeah, but it is fascinating. And we certainly see that in many ways in the paranormal, that like For instance, somebody sees Bigfoot suddenly out of the blue, and it changes their world. But after that, they start experiencing hauntings, and they may become aware of other phenomena like lights in the skies, UFO kind of stuff, and it's really a fascinating spider web. But it definitely seems to be intelligent. It's not just a random thing, but it's like like Nietzsche said, and you alluded to this earlier. You know, you look into the abyss looks back, and this may be what that is, right?
And let me say along those lines, I have a grandmother who is psychic.
Mm-hmm.
She saved my mom's life by telling her, "Don't get on that bus. Everyone on that bus will die." And sure enough, the bus went off a bridge.
Oh,
She had talked my mom and her sister from out of getting on the bus. But I have had no such experiences. When I was in England researching that book, I visited a lot of cemeteries, battlefields. I was alone in crypts. I was in very remote areas and early foggy mornings, and I didn't experience one supernatural or paranormal event.
mm-hmm.
It wasn't until I was on the at the ranch out and looking for firewood that day that I would consider, the sighting. A lot of people see lights in the sky. That's no big deal.
Sure.
But evidently I had some sort of close encounter when I reached for the pistol. And it was followed up. Well, it had been actually previewed by the lights flashing 3 months before.
Yeah.
And then when we came back to town and people around town corroborated it, thank goodness I have witnesses for all of these, including yesterday morning's little incident.
Right.
So,
because I think you get to the point where and I've had several experiences of my own, and I'm so grateful for the ones that I've had in company of somebody else, just because you do question yourself, you question your sanity, you question your grasp of reality, and just knowing that, well, it wasn't just me. This is also experienced by another person, and that's comforting, I think, for me.
And if I may, after I threw my trust into military witnesses where it belongs. I mean, these people handle nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And after they report these incidents, they're not taken off that duty. So their superior officers know they're not crazy. They're not hoaxing us. Well, I considered them to be very dependable witnesses. I extended full credibility to them. They convinced me. Then late in the book, I decided, why don't I look into crop circles, cattle mutilations, and alien abductions? And I looked into the Travis Walton case where he had the 6 witnesses who passed lie detector tests. Barney and Betty Hill, a couple, corroborating each other's testimony. The Linda Napolitano Brooklyn Bridge incident, which as you went into it became very strange and involved more and more people, but it all came together in the end.
Yeah.
Including being reported by people disparage the man by saying he was a security guard. He was a security escort for the Secretary General of the United Nations. He wasn't the guy at the mall, So,
yes, that's a good distinction. Yeah.
I decided to extend the same credibility to these people and other abductees when I looked into that. And I read Dr. David Michael Jacobs' books on abductions, alien abductions, and he believes, as I do now, that the aliens are here with sinister intent based on their less than kind treatment of humans. They dress it up in kindness. They say you're going to be okay, it won't hurt, and then it hurts like hell when the person gets a needle stuck in their navel and that kind of thing. And they kidnap women, they fertilize them, they steal their fetuses. This is rape and child theft.
Yeah.
These are not nice guys. So Dr. Jacobs said, if you think you may have been abducted, and you can live with it the way things are. Don't go there. It's going to ruin your life.
Yeah.
And after I told a neighbor about my book, she confided that she thought she may have been abducted on a family outing. And I told her, look, I told her what Dr. Jacobs said. And I said, if you want to go into it, there are groups you can contact and you can get all the help you want. But if you're living fine without it, don't go there.
Yeah.
And I also say in the book, and I say in my next book, which is about alien abductions, and I say to people all the time, if someone tells you they've been abducted, it's 90% plus it's true. There may be a few people running around trying to seek attention and that kind of thing. And these people have been traumatized severely. So you got, especially if they're friends or family members, take them at their word. And I would extend Dr. Jacobs' advice. Just let it go on with your life. Or if you can't, get counseling, get help. Because as you mentioned, that gentleman who was completely derailed by it, and it traumatized me to a certain extent for 6 weeks, and not that much happened in my presence.
I'm just curious, how do you arrive at the 90% number?
I'm just grabbing a number out of the air.
Okay, so
I don't know.
Yeah, well, fair enough. And I just wanted to quantify that, or if you had a methodology for that, I just wanted to know what that was. But that's,
No.
and I don't disagree with you. I think it's probably much more common than we believe. The layperson, for sure.
And I don't disbelieve children.
Yeah.
Now, in my next book, I cover can't think of the name of the school, the Ariel School incident in Ruwa. No, I can't remember the name of the country. Zimbabwe, where the kids were all out playing while the teachers were having a meeting, and they spotted 3 alien spacecraft, one of which landed, and they all went there and interacted with the beings. And in fact, one of the women, when she grew up, she said it ruined her life. She said every day she's wondering, when are they coming back?
Yeah.
To traumatize her. Even though it had been friendly interaction, according to all the children. So I don't disbelieve them just because they're under 21 or 18 or whatever.
Yeah. Well, there was another rash of children at a school, and this was in Malaysia and nearby countries but it was quite a bit different. But a gentleman by the name of Brent Swanser, who writes for Mysterious Universe, he did a whole article on it. And I'd heard of the Malaysian incident, but there was apparently several other incidents in proximity to Malaysia. And basically kids they saw these small UFOs. What we would probably say, oh, that must be a drone. But they saw them land, and these small, little, maybe 5-inch beings came out. And one of the kids allegedly grabbed one of them like it was an action figure. And apparently the thing didn't like that much because it zapped him and put a small burn on his arm. And then he dropped it, and all the kids were afraid and ran away. But that's a whole nother thing where, if it was a standalone incident, it's maybe easier for people to, it's not really what they saw, but it was the series of events around there that were seemed to corroborate the narrative of the one incident. So, yeah, this seems to be very real. Now, it makes you wonder, like you said, and maybe that's a good point. I've often thought, well, are we like the intergalactic petting zoo where they just kind of swing by and see what the people are up to? Or are we like a 7-Eleven where they're, in correlation to what you're saying about resources, they just kind of swing by and fill up the trunk and then head back home? Or what are they? What do you think of the narrative of them potentially being, and again, speculation at best, but of them potentially being interdimensional rather than maybe extraterrestrial?
Well, I don't rule it out entirely. I'm more of a nuts and bolts kind of guy, and I tend to think that, for example, in the Rendlesham Forest incident, when the sergeant, whose name evades my old memory right now, approached the machine, he experienced a time distortion. His watch was off by 45 minutes. Another security man, Air Force security man, a few feet away, his watch was only off by 20 minutes. And the people back at the checkpoint they left behind, I think theirs were off by 5 minutes. So there was a more severe time dilation the closer you got. Luis Elizondo reports that pilots also said they had the same effect. The same effect was reflected not only in their chronometer, but the rate of fuel consumption. So evidently there was an actual time distortion and not just an effect on the instrumentation. So my belief is one famous science fiction author, and I can't remember if it was Isaac Asimov or Arthur C. Clarke, had said that any technology sufficiently advanced would seem like magic.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a byproduct of their electromagnetic gravitic drives that distort time and space, that seem interdimensional and may have some interdimensional effects, but I think it's based on physical reality and nuts and bolts technology. And that reminds me that people report being taken through ceilings, walls,
Yes.
and barred windows.
Yeah. Windows. Yeah.
I've always approached everything about this first as a skeptic, and I'm gradually move over. For example, that story you would cite about the Malaysian school kids, I would just said, nah, not happening. But now I'm fully prepared to accept it. I'm going to look up that article and read up on it. So I don't know if this actually occurs, or since these beings can affect our emotions, our thoughts, our sensations, maybe they just making the victims think they went through the wall when they actually went out down the corridor and opened the door. Even Linda Napolitano, who was on the 8th floor, she was reported to have come through a steel grate over her window on the way to the UFO.
Yeah.
And there was an independent witness on the bridge who saw this. In fact, I think there were two. I was wondering, well, why do you need barred windows on the 8th floor to begin with?
That's a good point.
Are these guys capable of just unlatching them, or did it actually happen? And the thing is, we know so little. And that's why in my book and in television shows and radio programs I've heard lately, more and more scientists are stepping forward and saying, we need to investigate this. We need to look at it and see what's really going on, because we're actually being ignorant. When a scientist goes on media or writes down that, well, we know it's all nonsense, so we'll look into it. Well, that's just ignorance.
Yeah.
It's arrogance too. Look into it, find out, look at the evidence, and then say. If you can't say, maybe you want to look further. And this is all the more so true because many world governments, led by ours, have taken the hard evidence and hidden it away.
Yeah. And that's tragic, I guess in its own right. But maybe there's merit to, people aren't ready for it. They're not ready to have this worldview yet, because this is such a departure from the safety of our three dimensions and the world as we know it. And, and a critical paradigm shift like that can be devastating. But I will say one thing that I was really pleased about, and maybe it was a form of first step for eventual disclosure, but was when the Tic Tac videos came off of from the Nimitz and such from the Navy, and I really was surprised that it was just a blip on the radar. Largely, I mean, I was surprised that it wasn't the headline on every page, every article, everywhere. It was like, oh my God, we're not alone. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I think I'm told, or I read, that we have to thank Luis Elizondo and Christopher Millen for releasing those videos. I was stunned by the fact that they came out, and actually, it was largely ignored, but some news outlets did cover it extensively. Tucker Carlson, who since lost his job. I'm pleased with the coverage that News Nation is giving to all of these stories now. Early on, and the New York Times, they printed the articles by Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kean, and she was a real pioneer. Her book about pilots and generals and government officials testifying to the reality of UFOs was really groundbreaking, and I have some of the incidents she covered in her book and mine. So we have to thank people like that. So the New York Times covered it. It wasn't given the worldwide, oh my God, they're here coverage we kind of expected. And like I said, maybe that's better. Let's let people gradually get used to it. No, I was
Sure.
listening to a program past couple of nights where the guest mentioned that the Vatican seems ready to acknowledge it. They're ready to say, yeah, okay, no problem.
It's common. I often wonder, at this point, given the amount of things that are out there, is disclosure even necessary anymore? Doesn't there seem to be enough evidence and merit to show that, look, this stuff is happening, it's going on, and people are being affected by it. Now let's look into it. With the UAP task force and Arrow and ATIP and all those different groups, it already seems to show that obviously government resources have been ongoingly devoted to that. Even when these groups weren't really known or talked about, it was still being investigated and invested in on a governmental level. And then with people like Stephen Greer and his efforts to bring forth disclosure and all of the shenanigans that government has pulled about this, I do you think disclosure is still necessary?
I do.
Okay.
Again, gradual by a wider number of people, because there's still a faction in the government and in the Pentagon that seems to think that these creatures are demons. Even talking about them makes them manifest, which recalls the hitchhiker effect.
Yeah.
So we won't go there. We're just going to lock up the information and hide it from you. And there's another group that says we don't have a right to know, but we do have a right to know to a certain extent, because, as I was saying before, when you tell your friends, you tell your enemies. So we can't be totally forthcoming.
Yeah.
I think it's good to see more of this along the lines of Avi Loeb and different groups of scientists who are finally, Gary Nolan, I forget the names of the others right now.
Sure.
That have organized these groups of scientists to say, let's look at what's going on here. Don't just say, this makes me uncomfortable, so I'm not going to look at it. It doesn't exist. It does exist. And there are many people out here are still really unaware. Even I mentioned to a guy in the bank who's helping me open an account a couple of years ago that the Navy videos were real. The Navy acknowledged it. Well, he had seen the videos, but he didn't know it had been acknowledged. I mean, people have lives. They're interested in going to the store and football and all that kind of thing. So they're not like you and I will say, oh, there's a UFO story. Let me see what's going on.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing for me was that, once those mentions were made, once there was the video evidence and even an acknowledgement of an official capacity of these governmental entities going, yeah, we're not sure what this is, but it did things we don't think are possible with conventional means. And the one thing that I think it did do was made the discussion okay. Like, we can have these discussions more openly, and you can see mentions of them in popular media, like the news. It used to be like it was like the footnote or the punchline to the episode. It's like, oh, now we're going over to Phil, who's over at the trailer park where they had an alien land. The chuckling dismissal and such. But that's not the case as much anymore, or at least much less so. Like it's given at least the potential gravity that it never has before.
Even in 2015, when I wrote that thesis, I was still getting that kind of attitude. I'm sorry, I don't have a cough button. But since then, I'm surprised at how many people do take it much more seriously. They don't tell me that I'm having hallucinations when I talk about these subjects. In fact, some people have been older gentlemen who retired from the Air Force, a neighbor now, and the woman I mentioned before who said she might have been abducted. 3 people, once they heard about my book, they opened up to me about their own sightings.
Wow.
So it's gradually, and that's the way I think we should have it. We should have it gradual, because some people really are not ready to face the truth. I wasn't. I thought I was. It really hit me hard.
That's funny, because I was a believer But once I saw the craft that I was discussing with you prior to the show, and I've talked about it on many interviews when I've been interviewed as well. But I mean, it's a huge leap from believing to witnessing and knowing.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think it was such a big chasm until I got there, and I'm like, oh, this is way big. This is huge. It's groundbreaking, it's earth shattering, and it's paradigm shifting. Even though I had room in my belief system for it, when you know it's there, it's a whole different place.
Well, it happened to me.
Yeah, yeah.
When we reported this to our son, now my son is used to me being weird, as they say. I'm not weird.
Sure.
Phenomena are weird. I'm just interested in them. And he's also used to my wife being a rock solid, down to earth person, literally. And when he heard us both report on it, he seemed to have a slightly hostile reaction, which I attributed to being fear that it might be true.
Yeah.
He's since come around to that. He's a very brave guy. He used to work at an amusement park and go up on these roller coasters, would be out of order 300 feet in the sky and all that kind of thing.
Oof, yeah.
So, he's pretty fearless, but I think a lot of people are also in denial because they're afraid it might be true.
Right.
And it is disturbing to think that we may not be in control of things as much as we think.
Yeah.
I'm going to go out on a limb here. It's getting away from the book and the subject a little bit. But I've come to accept the fact that remote viewing is a form of psychic ability and that we can't just dismiss it. The military claims they discontinued the program. I'm not sure if it was discontinued or just transferred to the CIA or something like that.
Sure.
I had read that a remote viewer, I have the information in one of my files, had said that there are 4 underground bases, that they aren't what we think. There's not the one in the mountain outside Holloman Air Force Base, New Mexico.
Oh, Dulce?
I'm sorry.
El Dulce base? Is that the one?
Right.
Yep.
The 4 locations are in northern Australia, Africa, the Pyrenees between Spain and France, and north central Alaska. And they had the impression that they describe beings as what I call the tall whites. They're like taller versions of the grays, whom abductees report seem to be in charge of things.
Yeah.
So if there are 4 underground bases on 4 different continents with these creatures there, they may be calling more of the shots on Earth than we realize. I would say not directly by giving orders to the president, but by influencing the course of events somehow. I'm speculative on this.
Sure.
I have to go into it a lot more before I understand it. And my speculation in my book is based on all these really excellent reports by people. For example, when I covered the Foo Fighters, I found a series of articles in the American Legion magazine from 1945 by a professional journalist quoting the pilots involved. So it wasn't second, third, fourth hand. And I also would like to mention, and in the book, I poke holes in some widely accepted UFO incidents that I say I don't have enough evidence to convince me this ever occurred. So it's not just all true believer.
Yeah.
This is the Bible. I believe in it 100%. No, it's not by any means.
Right. Yeah, and I think you got to have critical thinking whenever you're diving into any of this. I mean, there's certainly those people out there that have an extreme confirmation bias. It's like they just hear something and boom, that's what it is. And I can't get there myself, but I think there's certainly enough that is going on that there's there's a lot to learn and a lot that we don't know and may never know throughout the course of our lifetimes. But I just am really encouraged that we're moving towards openness about these topics. Certainly these events, many of them are very real, and people did experience these things, and they deserve to be taken seriously for what they've lived through. Well, oftentimes they're very benign. For me, I saw a craft, and I don't have any missing time. That was the end of my experience. But however, since seeing that one, I've since seen other things in the sky that I may never even have paid attention to, but it's like, wait, that doesn't make sense. That's not the way this is supposed to look when something moves, or it can't move that fast. How did it do that 90-degree angle? I don't understand. That's, so it maybe it's kind of like peeling back the veil over your own eyes, and suddenly you realize there's a lot of things going on around us that we've just progressively tuned out, I guess.
And the author of this book, The Seventh Sense, who was on the radio a couple nights ago, Lynn Buchanan, he had not only been in the remote viewer program, he'd been an instructor.
Oh.
He said that our logical processes tend to shut down psychic abilities. I know I have confirmation bias, and I have relied heavily on logic, deduction, in gathering the evidence and presenting it in this book. I wanted to present a comprehensive, coherent history that was believable to people who were not necessarily exposed to it.
Right.
I had informed all the people in Congress about the book just before the November 13th hearing. And I've been meaning to get back to them. But if you're not in their district, you can't just email them. You got to snail mail. And I've got a stack of addressed envelopes right here that I have sent them the update on my reports about, for example, the hearing of 13 November.
Wow.
So our logic tends to shut down this psychic ability. But he said, when you have a thought that pops into your head and it doesn't seem to make sense, that's often the accurate information you're getting from your seventh sense, he calls it. He says the sixth sense is when you understand the ambiance. I grew up in Chicago. I was poor. We moved around a lot. I was the new guy. New guys are bully magnets. So I know this for a fact. You walk into a room, you can sense the vibes.
Yeah.
React accordingly. So he said, when you can do that, that's your sixth sense. Seventh sense is when you have all these psychic abilities. My wife just bought me the book. I'll be reading it.
Oh, very nice.
So he said, doesn't make sense. Probably the right thing. When they first built the World Trade Center, they were boasting about it on television. I had remarked, the way it's built, the way the building supported itself. I said, watch, a plane will hit it, the whole thing will collapse. I just blurted it out. I had no idea. This was like, when they built it. I don't know what year was that.
I don't know.
79, something like that.
Yeah.
So something impinged on it. It didn't make sense. But it made sense in the end.
Wow. What a foreshadowing. That's some serious foreshadowing.
I think it was just a coincidence. I'm not saying I'm a psychic.
Yeah, well, you never know. I'm certain. I'm of the belief that we all are. That it's just something.
You're right. Yes.
Yeah, that's intrinsic with all of us. But some people just are more dialed in naturally. But I think everybody has experiences of psychic awareness.
I fully agree. And by the way, some abductees report that their psychic abilities were awakened by the telepathic interaction with these beings. I think that's true.
Yeah.
It stimulated those parts of our brain that it's innate in all of us.
Yep, that lie dormant. They triggered it. Mm-hmm. Good point. That's an interesting take. Robert, we're kind of closing in on the end of our interview today, but I'm hoping you're going to come back and we can dive further into all of this. This is absolutely fascinating.
I agree.
I want you to take a couple minutes and let people know how to stay in touch with you, where to find your books, etc.
Well, I have an X account, but it's not premium.
Okay.
And I have a Facebook. There's an author's blog at the Pen and Sword website. To be honest, I haven't even visited yet. Pen and Sword, being a military publisher, they really seemed uneasy about how to market the book. So I kind of stepped in. I've been doing the promoting.
Sure.
The book came out October 11. I started that day. I thought I'd be at it 3 weeks. I'm still at it today. I mentioned before the show, I sent out 3,000 emails, one at a time, so they're not rejected as spam. And I've been on a few shows. And now I was invited to write an article about what I went through when I was creating the book. So my point is, I haven't really been in touch with people. I apologize about that.
Okay.
I have another book under contract that's been delayed. And as soon as Pen and Sword is happy with the performance of this book, the next in the series about UFO encounters and alien abductions will go into production within a few weeks, because I already finished it, but it needs a little bit of updating.
Okay. Well, fantastic. I look forward to our next discussion, sir. This has been absolutely fascinating. I know there was things that we talked about prior to recording that, so I know you got a lot more to share. But I found it absolutely fascinating, and thank you so much for appearing on the Paranormal Portal.
Thanks, Brent. You've been very kind. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure, sir. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap it up for us today. So hope you guys enjoyed the show, and thank you again so much for all your love and support. And remember, if you want to follow the Paranormal Portal, probably the easiest way is to head over to paranormalportal.net. And that's the homepage for the Paranormal Portal. And you'll find links to all of our different social media and sites and information about the shows, including our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/paranormalportal. Or just look for Paranormal Portal on Google or whatever search engine, and you'll find links to our social media, such as Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. So we're kind of all over the place, and we're spreading as well as we can. But anyway, thank you so much for the love and support. You all take care, and remember, we love you all. Be good, be kind, be nice. Take care of each other, help each other out, find the magic in every day, and remember to laugh as much as you can. Until next time.